God didn't make a mistake. Let's talk about something uncomfortable. Let's talk about betrayal, manipulation, and deception. But more importantly, let's talk about meaning in suffering. You see, most people assume that crossing paths with a narcissist is just a cruel twist of fate, a painful, unnecessary detour. But what if it wasn't a mistake? What if it was, in fact, essential? When you meet someone who is consumed by their own ego, who drains your energy, twists your reality, and leaves you questioning your worth, it can feel like a spiritual ambush. But in that chaos, there is something more profound at work. You weren't sent that person to destroy you. You were sent that person to awaken you, to reveal the parts of yourself that needed strength, to force you into confrontation with your boundaries, your values, your self-respect. We don't grow by staying comfortable. We grow when we're challenged. And few people challenge you like a narcissist. They pull you into the abyss of confusion. And in that darkness, you either collapse or you find the light inside yourself. Now, I'm not romanticizing abuse. I'm not saying suffering is holy. But I am saying that suffering is inevitable. And your job is to extract meaning from it. That is your divine responsibility. So when you ask, why did this happen to me? Try rephrasing it. What was I meant to learn from this? Maybe it was to finally speak up. Maybe it was to stop overgiving. Maybe it was to recognize your own pattern of self-abandonment. God didn't place that narcissist in your life as a punishment. He placed them as a mirror, a lesson, a test. And now it's your choice. Will you stay stuck in bitterness? Or will you rise into clarity? When you encounter a narcissist, especially in a close relationship, it rarely feels like an opportunity. It feels more like a trap, something toxic that slowly chips away at your sense of self. But beneath that emotional chaos lies a powerful invitation to grow. The encounter isn't random. It's not just some cruel accident. It's a mirror placed in your life with intention, not to punish you, but to push you. People often think growth comes from reading books, going to therapy, or watching inspirational content. And yes, those things help. But real growth, the kind that redefines who you are at your core, often comes through experience, especially the painful kind. When you meet a narcissist, you're thrown into a psychological battlefield. You're forced to confront questions you may have never asked. Why do I keep trying to please them? Why do I tolerate being spoken to this way? Why does part of me believe I deserve this? Those aren't easy questions, and they don't have quick answers. But that's the point. The narcissist's presence forces you to excavate. You start digging beneath the surface of your own behavior. You realize how much of your identity may have been built on avoiding conflict, on seeking validation, or on believing that love must be earned. None of that feels good, but it's necessary, because unless those patterns are brought to the surface, they continue unconsciously. And the narcissist, whether they know it or not, exposes them. Their manipulation, their need for control, their constant deflection of blame. It all serves as pressure. And pressure, when applied in the right way, reveals both the cracks and the strength. You begin to see where your boundaries were too loose. You realize how often you said yes when you meant no. You understand how silence became your survival tool. And once you see those things clearly, you can no longer unsee them. That clarity is uncomfortable, but it's also liberating, because it means you're finally in a position to make different choices. The narcissist was the trigger, but the transformation is yours. You can now define your limits. you can reclaim your voice. You can detach from the roles you were conditioned to play. None of that would have been possible had you not been pushed into discomfort. So while it might feel like you were broken in the process, the truth is you were being shown exactly where the healing had to begin. Suffering is one of those universal experiences that no one escapes, yet very few are taught how to face it. From a young age, we're conditioned to avoid pain at all costs, to push it away, numb it, or cover it with distraction. But the reality is that suffering, when approached with honesty and reflection, can become a doorway to meaning. It's not the suffering itself that transforms you, but what you choose to do with it. The presence of pain is often a sign that something vital is demanding your attention, something you've ignored, suppressed, or refused to see. When you go through the emotional and psychological toll of dealing with a narcissist, the pain doesn't just come from what they did to you. It comes from the confusion it creates within you. You question your worth, your instincts, even your memories. That disorientation is brutal. But within that chaos, there's a deeper call. The suffering becomes a prompt, a wake-up signal that says, look closer, not just at them, but at yourself, your habits, your beliefs, your wounds. Most people want to escape the suffering as quickly as possible. They want closure, justice, or even revenge. But those things are external, and they rarely provide lasting peace. The real healing begins when you stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start asking, what is this trying to teach me? That shift doesn't erase the pain, but it gives it direction. And direction is everything. Pain without purpose is just suffering. But pain that points you toward truth, that's sacred. That's powerful. The encounter with a narcissist may have shattered your assumptions about love, loyalty, or your own resilience. But it also gives you the rare chance to rebuild from the ground up, more aware, more intentional, and more grounded in who you really are. Sense. Suffering acts like a spotlight. It exposes the fractures in your foundation so you can begin to repair them with consciousness and care. There's wisdom buried in the agony. But it doesn't reveal itself unless you're willing to look it in the eye. You won't find meaning in suffering by pretending it doesn't hurt or by rushing to move on. You find meaning by sitting with it, by listening to what it's telling you, and by allowing it to change you. That's not weakness. That's strength in its purest form. Choosing to grow even when it hurts. One of the most disorienting parts of dealing with a narcissist is how they seem to erode your sense of what's real. Their manipulation is subtle at first. Small criticisms, shifting blame, rewriting past conversations. But over time, it accumulates. You start second-guessing your instincts, you doubt your reactions, you even question whether your needs are valid. But here's the thing, in the very act of pushing you to the edge, the narcissist unintentionally reveals where your own internal structure needs strengthening. The way a narcissist behaves, whether through gaslighting, emotional withdrawal, love bombing, or constant devaluation, challenges you to look at how well you've established your boundaries. Were you taught to say no without guilt? Were you encouraged to trust your intuition? Were you given space to express anger or discomfort without being shamed for it? For many, the answer is no. And this is what a narcissist exploits. They don't just cross boundaries. They reveal that those boundaries were never really there to begin with, or that they were too flexible, too accommodating, too afraid of conflict. Being in a relationship with a narcissist puts a spotlight on those blind spots. It shows you how often you've prioritized peace over truth, how often you've tolerated discomfort just to keep the connection alive. And most importantly, it forces you to ask why. Why do I keep giving the benefit of the doubt to someone who continually harms me? Why do I feel responsible for their feelings but not my own? Why do I shrink myself just to avoid being accused of being too much? These aren't just relationship questions. These are self-concept questions. They go to the root of your identity. And that's where the real transformation happens. Because once you see the pattern, you can begin to change it. You can stop normalizing emotional neglect. You can stop bending over backward to make yourself lovable to someone who only loves control. You start to recognize that the way someone treats you says more about them, but the way you respond says a lot about you. The narcissist's manipulation in all its cruelty becomes a kind of twisted teacher. Their behavior draws out what you've been avoiding within yourself. And while it's painful, deeply painful, it's also clarifying. You learn to hold your own emotions as valid. You learn to communicate limits clearly. You begin to reclaim the parts of yourself you abandoned just to stay in the relationship. In that sense, their presence, while toxic, becomes a catalyst for radical self-awareness. When you're entangled with a narcissist, it's easy to feel powerless. The constant manipulation, the emotional roller coaster, the subtle digs that chip away at your confidence, it all creates a sense of paralysis. You start to believe that you have no control, that you're stuck in a cycle with no exit. But that belief, while understandable, is not the truth. The truth is that you always have a choice. You may not control their actions, but you control how you respond. You control what you accept. You control what you allow to continue. And that realization can be terrifying because it shifts the focus inward. It's far easier to stay in the mindset of a victim, to point to the narcissist's behavior and say, this is why I'm miserable. And yes, their actions are damaging. Yes, their presence creates real pain. But if you remain in that space, where all the power lies in their hands, you also remain stuck. The moment you begin to take ownership of your response, everything changes. That's when the transformation begins. Not when they apologize or wake up or change, because most won't. It begins when you say, enough. Owning your agency means being willing to make hard decisions. It means walking away from people who don't value your presence. It means facing the fear of loneliness, of disapproval, of temporary discomfort. And that's not easy. It's one of the hardest things you'll ever do, but it's also the most empowering. Because when you reclaim your choice, you reclaim your life. This is where responsibility becomes liberating instead of burdensome. You stop waiting for closure. You stop waiting for them to see your worth. You stop hoping that if you just love them enough, they'll finally become who you need them to be. And instead, you start showing up for yourself. You realize that protecting your peace, your sanity, and your self-respect is not selfish. It's sacred. What's most powerful about this shift is that it doesn't require the narcissist to do anything different. They can stay the same. And yet your internal world starts to change. You begin setting boundaries not as an act of defiance, but as a declaration of value. You start honoring your emotions instead of dismissing them. And you step into the role of someone who doesn't just survive painful relationships, but learns, heals, and rises beyond them. That's what it means to stop being a victim of fate and start being an agent of choice. Life often doesn't go according to plan, Though relationships, especially with narcissistic individuals, can feel like the most unexpected detour, a painful one filled with confusion, self-doubt, and emotional exhaustion. In the middle of that storm, it's natural to wonder if everything is just random chaos or some cruel mistake. But if you step back and look through a wider lens, there's a deeper truth that begins to surface. Often, the most difficult experiences are the ones that prepare you for who you're meant to become. And they don't. Happen by accident. When someone toxic enters your life, it can feel like divine abandonment. You might ask, why would God allow someone like this to get so close to me? But perhaps the better question is, what was this meant to uncover in me? Discomfort, especially the emotional kind, has a way of sharpening your awareness. It brings hidden things into the light. Your people-pleasing tendencies, your fear of confrontation, your tendency to tie your worth to how others treat you. A narcissist doesn't just test your patience, they test your identity. And it's through that test that clarity begins to form. There's a spiritual dimension to this process. Growth rarely comes without disruption. If you were never challenged, never pushed, never made to question your own patterns, would you ever evolve? It's easy to be at peace when everyone around you is kind. It's easy to have confidence when you're constantly affirmed. But real transformation is forged in resistance. Sometimes it's the pressure of a hard relationship that births the most unshakable version of you. Maybe the presence of the narcissist was meant to serve as a turning point. Maybe it was the only thing strong enough to snap you out of old cycles that were quietly eroding your sense of self. Maybe the pain wasn't punishment, it was preparation, because the strength you develop in the face of that kind of chaos is the strength you'll need for the next chapter. The one where you lead, where you create, where you stop shrinking and start standing. It's not about glorifying suffering. It's about recognizing that even in the most painful seasons, there can be purpose. Even in what feels like a breakdown, there can be the seeds of a breakthrough. God's plan doesn't always make sense in the moment, but sometimes it takes a deep wound to wake you up to your own worth. And from that awakening, a new life can begin. So if you've found yourself tangled in the web of a narcissist, don't let that chapter define your entire story. Let it refine you. Let it open your eyes to the patterns, the blind spots, the unspoken pain, and then let it guide you toward healing, strength, and clarity. You were never placed in that situation by mistake. You were placed there to see, to learn, to rise. And while it may have broken you in some ways, it also built something stronger in its place. A version of you that no longer begs for love, but stands firmly in self-respect. You didn't go through that pain for nothing. There's purpose in it if you're willing to uncover it. Your boundaries, your voice, your truth, they're not just worth protecting. They're worth honoring. And you are worth the life that comes from finally living in alignment with them. Thank you for taking the time to sit with these hard truths. Thank you for being brave enough to look inward. And most of all, thank you for believing that healing is possible, even after everything. It is, and you're already on your way. Take care of your heart. Stay grounded in your truth. And never forget, you are not alone, and you were never a mistake. Goodbye for now, and thank you.